It was the summer of 2004. My brother, my cousin, and I were on a camping trip near an old farmhouse/factory that has its own history. I had been there before with other people, so it wasn't anything new to me. The rest of our family went to go horseback riding, so the three of us decided to hang around the park with the forest, which was surprisingly deserted. I have to admit, it kind of was eerie how the park was so deserted. It was a hot summer's day, Fort Collins, Colorado, and there should have been a bunch of kids playing. But instead, it was just three, all aged between 15 to 17, as we were then. My mom had left us a cool bag with some ice cream, which had situated under a tree, out of the sun, as we didn't want the lollies to melt. I walked over to get them, as we're all quenched for thirst and needed something cold and refreshing. As I walked over to this wooded area, I had the strangest feeling I was being watched. I've heard people talking of this sensation before, but no idea what it actually felt like. I could feel eyes on me, a cold stare that was tracing me up and down, left to right. I made a 360 turn to see who or what it was. My brother and cousin could sense something was wrong, so they ran over to me. They went deathly quiet, and I knew they too felt something stare. "Look," my brother said, pointing in the distance, about 30 yards away. It was the strangest thing I had ever seen in my life. At first glance, it appeared to be a bear, which was grounds enough to be petrified. But this creature was no bear. It had the shape and form of a bear, but with brown fur. It appeared to be about 12 to 15 feet tall and came about halfway of some of the trees overhead. It had what appeared to be horns, which were strange things sticking out of its head. In fact, the horns almost seemed to kind of blend into the branches. It was kind of hard to differentiate between the two. This thing stood tall. I knew if it spotted us, we would be dead. We were terrified by seeing this thing. Thankfully, one of us was thinking straight, and my cousin grabbed me and my brother by the necks, whispering, "Run." As if by force, we all began running, got into the park and hid under the tire swing, at least until our parents showed up. When we told them what happened, they didn't believe us, thought we were just trying to pull a prank. But 17 years later, I know what I saw. It was real and terrifying, and I can't get that image out of my head. I never will. Believe me if you want, but there is something mysterious and terrifying that dwells deep within the forest. Maybe it's a monster, maybe it's a demon, or maybe, perhaps, it's a guardian. I don't know. This was back in September of 2007. Back then, I was 21. At the time, I lived with my two roommates at the time in a small rented house right in town. The place had a huge backyard and stretched out open into a field and the forest line past our fence. Now, me and my friends had permission from all owners to go out there and hunt occasionally. Today, I'm a proud vegan, but back then, I didn't give two craps about any animals, so I hunted when I could. On one occasion, in September, myself and my buddy went hunting for some deer, whatever we could find. Dating apps were just new, so we wanted some cool pictures of ourselves with guns to impress the girls around here. I look back on it and I know, the thought is pretty cringy, but we were young. Whether or not we would find any deer was another issue. Even typing this sends shivers down my spine because ultimately, I recall the incident. My buddy had just went to go pee, and I was sitting playing a game called Snake on my flip phone. I felt so bad with that phone. It's laughable now. My buddy was away for what seemed to be a long time, longer than it takes anybody to pee. I got worried. The next thing I heard was my buddy screaming in what sounded like agony. I ran in an effort to find him, and when I did, he was on the ground with a bloody wound on his leg. He was pointing to his right, and when I looked, I stopped dead at what was before me. It appeared to be a hyena-looking like creature, with this leathery red raw dripping bits of flesh from its mouth. It was disgusting looking. Its nose and face seemed to be smashed in, but it looked wrong in every sense of the way. The creature spotted me and began to run at the speed of lightning. As if by divine intervention, I managed to grab my gun, pulling the trigger, maiming this thing in the spinal cord, which jutted out of its emaciated frame. It did not die, but it bled profusely and ran. I lifted my buddy up and dragged him along the forest floor until we got home. When we told the hospital what had happened, they didn't believe us, but we thought we were just some drugged-up college kids. But we both know what happened, and we'll never forget what happened on that day back in September of 2007. Since then, I've heard of people mentioning the phrase dogman, but I don't know. I guess I have heard some reports of hyena-like creatures that are bipedal, and I guess if I think back on it, that could have been it, but I don't know. The idea of a dogman seems crazy, but so is what we saw. I guess I'll let you be the judge on this one. It was around 10 p.m. in the evening. The day had been cloudy and rainy, and it stayed that way for most of the night. Earlier that night, me and my girlfriend at the time were playing Super Mario Sunshine on our GameCube, until we began hearing heavy rainfall outside. Because of this, the both of us decided to go for a walk in the rain. I know it sounds weird, but this was in southern Spain, and we just don't get heavy showers that often. So we put on our raincoats and our wellies and got an umbrella. It looked quite romantic out, and it was still relatively bright as it was summer. My then girlfriend was wearing a white rain jacket as we left our house and headed to a local park. This was surrounded by the most gorgeous woodland. What was strange was that as we were walking, moths and flies kept flocking to my girlfriend and her rain jacket and her hair. She was getting very annoyed, ready to turn back home. But luckily, I had some anti-pest spray and tried my best to help. We kept walking, and as we walked into this woodland area, we stopped under a tree. We kissed. The kiss was short-lived, however, as we both heard a yelp and a growl and witnessed something terrifying. In what appeared to be a horse, which was strange-looking, mangy, and disgusting, appeared to have what looked like rotting flesh, gray and pale, and a maniacal expression. This was like a horse from hell. I know it sounds ridiculous, but how else do I even describe it? I grabbed my girlfriend, keeping her from moving, and we both stood there behind the tree, shaking. I'd actually ended up biting her, and she was bleeding. I wondered if this crazed thing could smell the blood. I felt terrified. Eventually, this thing backed away, but I knew it was circling around us, keeping watch of us. And we witnessed that it had appeared to kill a deer, which was lying maimed and decimated on the forest floor near us. We both briskly walked back home, sincerely regretted ever leaving the house. And not long after, we both kept fighting and blaming each other for going on the walk. We couldn't cope with the horror of what we had seen, and we both felt we were going crazy. We ended up going our separate ways. That was 19 years ago. I often think about the incident of Rosa and I to this day. I might try and reach out to her so we can both talk about it again. I feel we both need counseling, as we witnessed something from hell. Something that destroyed our relationship and made us afraid of everything. I hope by submitting this story, I can find other people who may have witnessed similar events and experiences, can maybe point me in the right direction. It is my hope that I can join some type of support group for people who have PTSD after seeing strange and terrifying creatures that society, the world, and everybody claims over and over that do not exist. At the age of 10, my family and I took a vacation down to Wilson's Creek National Battlefield in Missouri. Now, this was a pretty cool place for us. Most of the battlefield is covered by dense forest. We camped out of the park for 2 nights straight with very little rain. But it did start raining on our second night there. There was some light thunder and lightning. My parents were experienced at camping, so they didn't take much notice, but instead told us some ghost stories from the comforts of our tent. When the storm had calmed, my parents went back to their tent, left me and my younger brother in ours. My younger brother slept soundly very quickly, but I was still freaked out by the thunder and hoped it would not start again. I guess I wasn't a camping kid, as I freaked out about any deers, bugs, bears, or anything finding its way to our camping site. I could even hear a rustling sound just outside of our tent, and my blood went cold. I felt nauseous, wanting to call out for my parents, but my voice could not leave my body. So, very carefully, I unzipped the opening of our tent, just about 5 or so inches, and I looked out to see what was rustling outside. I still remember, 40 years later, the terror I felt when I saw what was lurking just outside. It was some type of wild dog, but most horribly, it had 3 heads, like a Cerberus. It was like a thing from hell. It was black and had glowing red eyes. It was terrifying. I promise this is the only thing I could think of as a Cerberus. My eyes were glued to this thing as it began walking around, sniffing. This thing was massive, and the odor of sulfur filled my nostrils. I knew this was something not right. What was striking is its face. It looked all sorts of wrong. This was no normal animal, my friends. This was something else entirely. This being did not belong on this mortal plane. I just closed my eyes and begged God to cause me to pass out. I watched this thing walk around for about a half an hour. It could have been longer. But then, I never see it leave. It just kind of disappeared. I didn't sleep a wink that night, and the sulfuric smell still filled the campsite. That didn't really dissipate for a while. When sunrise came, I was so glad to go and wake my parents. Of course, they said it was a bad dream and the smell had dissipated by then. They told me this nightmare was childish and delusional. But 40 years ago now, 40 years, I'm confident by what I saw. At the time, I didn't know it was a Cerberus. I didn't know what it was. But as I got older, and my interest in the paranormal and cryptozoology grew and deepened, I learned more about the various kinds of creatures and demons, like a Cerberus, for example, and to know that usually when there's a demonic sighting or encounter, the sulfuric smell is often accompanied by it. That's why I know what it was, that it was not from this world.